I said to him, do I get a sticker like we do in America? And he said, for what? And I said, for voting. And he said, no. And I said, why not? And he said, because you're an adult, not a 5-year-old going to the dentist. Why are Americans so weird? Hello and welcome to a very exciting video, one in which I get to vote for the first time in the UK. Today is a general election in 2024 if you're watching this video from the future, and I became a UK citizen in January of 2022, which means I missed the previous general election by 3 years. Previously, I was on visas and had the ability to live in the UK but not to vote in the UK. But since becoming a citizen, that entitles me to vote in the UK. I got my polling card in the mail a few weeks ago, and I am all ready for this historic moment for me. Funnily enough, today is the 4th of July, which is also American Independence Day, so there's something a little bit strange about this as well. Now, I am also an American citizen still, and I can still vote in the USA elections as well. I have voted in every American presidential election since I was old enough, which means my first vote in the US was in 2012, though that's the only time I voted in the USA in person, as in 2016 and 2020, I was living in the UK at that point, so I did vote from abroad. I have to admit that while my views are clear in US elections on who I will and have voted for, they're a little more muddy in the UK because I haven't grown up exposed to this political system and parties. However, in the US, we are taught from birth, basically, that voting is essentially a duty that we have as citizens, and it is an extremely patriotic thing to do in America. We are taught the ideal that soldiers, military, etc. have died for your right to vote and for you to live in a democracy, and that to respect that, you always exercise your right to vote. So I feel like that also extends to the UK. Whether or not voting is seen in a similar way here, I don't know, you tell me, but I have researched the issues I care about and the different parties enough to cast a vote. I did have a conversation with my husband earlier, and I said to him, do I get a sticker like we do in America? And he said, for what? And I said, for voting. And he said, no. And I said, why not? And he said, because you're an adult, not a 5-year-old going to the dentist. Why are Americans so weird? So there's that. Apparently I will not be getting a sticker. But I am about to leave my house to go to the polling place, so I will see you when I get back. Okay, as promised, no sticker involved, but I did vote, and here are a few things I noticed. Also, on the topic of the sticker, I cracked up because I was looking this up to see if I would get a sticker in the UK, you guys, and I found this petition from 2013 that's called Hand Out I Voted Stickers at UK Election, which is signed by one person and reads, "The Americans seem far too excited by their I voted stickers. We should get them too, but they should be good quality and possibly even treated as a souvenir. It may even encourage a few shallow people to vote." Anyway, voting here was using a pencil and a literal piece of paper. I know that's obvious if you're in the UK and you've lived here your whole life, but the state I voted in the last time I voted in America actually uses electronic voting systems, so I put my vote into a computer system, so that felt different to hear. According to my research, the UK does not use voting technology except in some cases to read the votes in some places, but a solid chunk of American states, not all of them and not necessarily the majority, but like a solid chunk do use electronic voting means. Of course, America has its own problem with voting methods, including the very famous incident in 2000 where Florida messed everything up with their punch card voting, and they had what were known as hanging chads, which is essentially a fragment of a piece of paper that hasn't fully detached from the voting card, so it couldn't fully be counted as a definitive vote for that person. I did have to use ID to vote in the UK, which is a newer development here, which came into place in 2022. I was used to this, however, as it is common in most places in the US to require this. I first voted in Pennsylvania, which requires first-time voters to show ID, which I was a first-time voter at the time, and Florida requires all voters to present photo ID and signature, meaning that your signature has to match that of a signature on a passport or driver's license or something similar in order to be allowed to vote. I also had a little chat with one of the polling people and learned a bit more about how those not present in the UK can still vote. in both the US and the UK, you can still vote if you're not going to be physically present on election day, but the UK has one of these options being called a proxy vote, which means that you nominate someone else to cast your vote for you on election day. You cannot do this in the US. Someone else can drop your, what they call an absentee ballot, off at the polling station, but they're not at all doing the voting for you in any way. You have to fill out the ballot yourself. That is mailed to you, sign it, seal it, they just drop it off. This is how I typically vote in the US. So I apply for the postal or absentee vote, and I could send it directly to an address that they give me to send it to, but I always send it to my dad to make sure that somebody's actually holding it in their hands that I know, and he is allowed to drop it off for me at the polling station. But again, signed, sealed, he's not actually doing any voting on my behalf. Another interesting fact I looked up was the percentage of turnout in general, obviously, of registered voters in each country, and it turns out the UK and the US are roughly along the same lines. The UK can be a little bit higher, but it does depend on the election at an average of about 65% voter turnout. Technically, in the US, each state runs their own election. So technically, there is no national election. This means that you also typically vote on state matters with your presidential vote in the US. So for example, in Florida, there are plenty of different measures that I will be expected to vote on at the same time as I would vote for president. This is different than in the UK. There was nothing like that, just one vote for who I wanted to be MP for my area. Again, a ballot in the US does look different because you're voting on state measures every 4 years at the same time as the president. And as I just mentioned, in the US, presidential elections happen every 4 years, whether you like it or not. In the UK, general elections are every 5 years at the max, but the party in power can call a general election sooner than that. Another difference is that in the US, we do vote for the president. You are not casting a vote for the party necessarily. It is for the person, and it is not for a local person. It is, do you want George Bush or Barack Obama or George Washington? Well, George Washington wasn't voted in like that, but whatever. You are voting for that person. In the UK, you are not voting for a new prime minister. You are voting to elect your local MP or member of parliament. Then, the political party that wins the most seats in the House of Commons will form the new government, and their leader will become prime minister. So on my UK ballot, the names displayed were local names of my local MP candidates. So again, it's a little bit of a different system. I mean, it's a lot of it, a different system, but this is just the basics. General elections in the UK also must happen on a weekday, typically on a Thursday, but they can happen any month of the year. In the US, presidential elections are held in November on a Tuesday. It's set as the Tuesday next after the first Monday in November. So how do I feel having voted for the first time in the UK? Because ultimately I am American, so we'll always make it about our feelings. I feel very happy. I'm not the world's most political person, but I do believe in the importance of voting, as I said, and I still believe to this day that things really turned around for me in the UK once I got citizenship, because finally I had the official documentation and felt more included in the place that I had lived in for so long, and finally was just like any other citizen. So getting to vote in an election as a UK citizen was a really cool feeling and cemented my decision to get citizenship. I did not have to get citizenship. I could have been on an indefinite visa, essentially for the rest of my life. I could have done that, but I wouldn't have been able to participate as fully in life as I can here now. That sentence didn't make sense. You know what I mean. This brings me to the end of this video. If you're in the UK and you voted or plan on voting, comment that you have voted down below and I'll comment back, which I feel is even better than an I voted sticker. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.